Greetings and salutations, everyone, and welcome back to tonight's second half. Before we jump into it, a couple links. As you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon and PayPal are in the description below. Merch is displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, the links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support this channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. Doesn't cost you a cent. Click that like button. Takes half a second. If you don't want to miss any of the informative uploads that I put out, click that bell icon. And finally, last but definitely not least, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because all these things, they really do help this channel to continue to grow and go, and they matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's get on with tonight's second half, shall we? Today's first encounter. Hey guys, I've got an unexplained encounter to share with you. It happened about 6 years ago, over the summer of my junior year going into my senior year of high school. I experienced something that I can't quite shake off. My friend's parents were going out of town for the weekend, so myself and 3 others planned a sleepover so we could hang out, be as loud as we wanted. We slept over at my friend Matt's house. His house was located on the east side of town where there's a small wooded area. That night, we all mentioned how we should sleep on his trampoline, since it was warm that night and none of us had done it before. Matt was a little concerned with the idea because he had mentioned that homeless people and sometimes deer wander in and out of the little forest next to his house. There was no fence separating us from the woods, so anything could go in and out of the yard, into the forest and vice versa. I told him we're going to be fine and that there was nothing to worry about. Boy, did I wish I could take that statement back. We started setting up our spots on the trampoline, getting cozy, hanging out, looking at our phones. About an hour into this, we started hearing twigs snapping and leaves crunching. Matt was the only one who was not on the trampoline, but sitting on a small river donut on the deck next to the trampoline. He was sitting on this due to an injury that had happened to him a few weeks prior. I was looking at Matt while all of this was happening. He was looking into the woods. He didn't say anything other than a quiet, "I told you this was a bad idea." I kept listening for a few minutes and then it stopped. My friends were all listening as well, but they didn't seem concerned. It was really quiet after it stopped. None of us had said a thing. We all looked back at our phones, and that's when we saw it. The second my eyes met my phone, I saw from the peripheral vision this 7 to 8 foot tall thing come running out of the woods into the backyard and darted to the side of the house. All we saw was a silhouette of whatever it was. It was almost as if it was ghostly. It was extremely slim, bipedal. Here's the kicker, though. We saw it run, but we did not hear it run. It made 0 sound when it was moving, but it made the motion of someone running. When we saw this, we all did the same exact thing, screamed, and ran off the trampoline. Matt was the first inside, and I was surprised he wasn't even able to walk, let alone run, because of his injury. We had left some blankets and pillows outside because we were in such a hurry. We shut and locked the sliding door, all of the windows and doors we could find. We kept looking out some of the windows to see if we could see anything, but there was nothing. Because we were so startled, we stayed up until sunrise to finally go to sleep. I think about what happened on almost a daily basis. Everyone I have told has a theory that it escaped from the mountains next to the forest. For a little backstory, I live in Magna, Utah, the mountains on the east side that separate us from Thule are said to have housed some sort of secret military base with experimentation and other things that were done on who knows who or what. I've had dreams of myself finding the base and going inside. Today's second encounter. Last year I had a very strange experience in a national forest out in California. I was by myself on a road trip with my dog. I was driving pretty far into the Mendocino National Forest. I like to camp in national parks, forests, because it's isolated so my dog can roam, and they're free of charge. A trade-off for sketchy/rough drives into the park sometimes and lack of service/assistance. Anyway, I was driving up this dirt road, kind of curling up a mountain around 5 p.m. It was very nice out, sunny and warm with a slight breeze. Nothing serious happened, but I felt extremely uncomfortable driving into the area, and that feeling did not let up. Driving up the mountain, I felt like I shouldn't stay here, and I even texted my boyfriend about it for as long as I could before my phone completely lost service. I was looking for a sign of another person having been around the area lately, but I didn't see anything. I pulled over and got out of my car with my dog to look over the edge and noticed a dead squirrel and some broken glass mixed in the dirt and gravel road. Yucca, my dog, starts growling slightly. She's vocal, but I've almost only ever seen or heard her growl at other dogs. I did see her growl at a possum once, so it could be something she smelled. This place continued to make me feel quite on edge, but I pride myself in being an independent traveler and backpacker, so I decided to continue at least a bit further with my grumbling pup to see if I could find a good place to camp. I continued to notice more dead animals. Keep in mind, no one is going to be going more than 5 to 10 miles an hour up this thing. And that's if there's anyone even here. I hear men's voice. They sound close, and I think I should call out to them. So I stop my car, but then kind of freeze up and feel like I shouldn't. I can't really make out what they're saying. I don't see any sign of anyone anywhere. And I get back in my car and continue to slowly drive forward and cautiously look for where the voices could be coming from. I never ran into other people in a national park or forest when I've gone this deep. The unsettling feeling grows about the voices, which have sort of come and gone a few times. And I give up and begin to turn my car around. I honestly don't remember how Yucca was acting on the way down. I was scared and focused on getting out of there. I just distinctly remember being surprised at her grumbling when we were standing outside of my car. Dangerously quickly, I went back down the mountain, not seeing any sign of anyone. I decided to spring for luxury and get a hotel for the night. I figured I was just fine. Huge and open spaces can be intimidating, I told myself, and the voices could have been echoing from somewhere far off, and they just sounded close. Animals die, glass gets broken, nothing happened, cool. But I remembered this place, it sticks with me. Whenever I'm watching scary movies, if I'm walking my dog in the woods at night, nothing compares to the feeling I had driving up that mountain. And it's honestly kind of interesting to me as well as frightening. I recently happened across some information as well as some Native American lore that made me feel really uneasy. Fast forward a year, I mentioned this place to a few people and the haunting vibes it gave me, but nothing much more. Googled the national park once and didn't see anything, but didn't look much further. I like scary movies and things of that nature, hence my fascination in this little event. So my boyfriend and I were coming up on our finishing road trip the other day. We were in Wyoming for a wedding. There were only 2 to 3 hours left and the sun had set, so we decided to listen to some scary podcasts. We went to the No Sleep podcast to X-Files and ended up on True Stories, dealing with Native American lore. I'm half paying attention, petting my dog, playing Pokemon. And I hear the narrator mention skinwalkers and shapeshifters and such. Very briefly says what they are and casually mentions they can mimic voices. I mean it when I say the most horrible chills I had ever had in my life crawl down my spine, and I stare at my boyfriend and ask him if he remembers that national forest I was freaked out about last year. He says he does and reminds me that he texted me I was probably close to a skinwalker or shapeshifter, and he really did. I remember him saying that, but don't know much about their lore, and thought he was just being funny, like, yeah, Bigfoot is probably stalking you, or some other dad joke. And he was like, no, I mean, I was mostly joking, but I said it specifically because you were hearing voices, and they could not be traced. I start to feel strange, and I start Googling skinwalkers and shapeshifters and such. They're allegedly able to mimic human voices, and they would live in that sort of area. It all matched up. Obviously, there's a ton of questionable info out there, but I tried to find more reputable websites and authentic experiences. I then specifically looked up missing persons in the area, and the first headline that catches my eye is another family goes missing in Mendocino. And I went through different websites and news articles of people going missing, but they're all a little hidden underneath national park websites and pictures of trees. I remembered looking up the forest about a year ago and didn't see anything, and realized these stories did not seem to be talked about much, which piqued my interest. It was stated that well over 100 people in the past 8 years have gone missing and not have been found, on top of many which are found dead. It just has my interest spiked now. Remembering how unsafe I felt and how much I wanted to get out of there terrifies me, and I felt so uneasy about what I was hearing, and still do to this day. My dog and I are very close. She was a stray that started following me one day, and I ended up bringing her home from Costa Rica. So, her little growls along the way makes me feel like there was something wrong. Even though it was just a storytelling video, these stories originate from somewhere. I have done a lot of solo traveling, both in and out of the country, and have never had such a bad feeling on top of seeing an unnecessary amount of dead animals in a national forest, which seems strange. I don't think I'll be doing more solo traveling unless it's around civilization. Today's third experience. Growing up, I lived in northeastern Arizona, literally 5 miles south of the Navajo Res in Winslow. Naturally, being that close to the reservation, skinwalkers were a huge topic of conversation amongst the locals, and we all took it very seriously. Stories of personal experiences abounded. I was no different. Well, to start off my sets of experiences, I was 9 or so. My family had gone camping in a little spot about 50 miles or so south of town called Hart Canyon, near Wiggins Crossing. We had been there all day, and I was extremely familiar with the area, as we had camped there 20 or so times before, so my parents just let me wander off in the woods. This was back in the early 90s. Anyway, I had some G.I. Joes that I had been playing with in the nearby creek, about 80 yards from the campsite. There were no other campers there with us. My mom had called me back to camp for dinner, so I left and ate. Played around camp for a while and realized I had forgotten my G.I. Joes back at the creek, so I took a flashlight and headed back that way. I knew right where I had left them, so in no time I found them and grabbed them up. As I was squatting down to grab them on the edge of the water, a sudden urgency that I'd never felt before ran down my spine. I remember feeling frozen because of fear, like the little boy in E.T. when the alien comes out of the field for the first time and he's trying to scream for his family. I looked up and pointed my flashlight to the other side of the creek, and about 10 yards down the way I saw something. At first I thought it was a deer, but it was standing up, so I thought it may have been a bear, but it was too skinny and not enough puffy hair. It slunk behind a tree and peered out slightly. I seriously was too scared to move. I had just read about Bigfoot for the first time, since it wasn't really popular in my area. I thought for a long time that's what I had seen. I finally had seen enough to gather my wits and scream as fast as I could back to camp. I told my parents, and they kind of dismissed it as my imagination, so I just stayed close for the rest of the trip. 2 years later, I was at my house. I have 2 dogs. They were outside dogs, and they lived their whole lives in my backyard. One night they went psycho, barking at first at something in the alley behind the house. Then they both started whimpering. I had my window open slightly, and one of my dogs straight up jumped up to the window, frantically chewing on the screen, forcing his way into the house, and would not leave for 3 days. Another time, when I was 13, we used to play games at night in the town. Mostly there being nothing much else to do, we'd walk around the neighborhood and act suspicious so cops would come and chase us. And we'd run down alleyways and hop into random folks' backyards and hide. Now, it was extremely common to see intoxicated Navajo or Hopi in the alley or the street, so it was no big deal to see one in the alley behind my house at night, as we being 2 of my friends, ran from the police car hot on our trail. We saw him plain as day standing in our way. We ran around him and jumped into the nearest yard to hide. We waited for the cop to pass us and hopped back out. Literally 3 minutes went by. We ran back the way we came, and as we got to the point where the Native American had been, he was gone. Legit, in his place was a coyote, sitting there watching us. We ran past it, feet from it, and anyone who knows coyotes knows they will bail out way before you even get close to them. This bugger held its ground. We all freaked out and stayed inside for a month. The last experience was when I was maybe 15 or 16. My brother has a girlfriend that lived in a small community south of Winslow called Starlight Pines. About 25 miles. Well, we went to go see her one day, and as we drove out, about 15 miles out, we saw a Native American guy standing on the side of the road, which was quite odd. Because the res was north of town, and it was rare to see anyone on foot south of town because it's just desert and forests for literally 80 miles. Anyway, we see this guy. He looked normal enough. Flannel shirt, jeans. We get to our destination, hung out with my brother's girlfriend and her family well into the night. When we decided to head back home, hopped in his truck, a Chevy S10, and drove back the way we came. In the same spot, we saw the Native American. He was still there. I remember thinking, that dude is crazy standing out there all day and into the night. What's he doing? Right as we passed him, we heard a loud bang on the truck. At first, I thought we hit an animal, but I hadn't felt anything that we ran over. I turned around and looked back through the back window. My brother started to slow down, thinking there may be something wrong with the truck. In the brake lights, I see the Native American guy chasing after us. We were easily going 55 to 60 at this time. This guy is on the road, feet behind us. I scream at my brother not to stop. Gun it, man, gun it. He does, and being an S10, it had a speed governor on it at 80 miles an hour. This guy keeps up with us. We are seriously freaking out. I then asked my brother, what do we do if we don't make it back to town? Or what about when we do and we have to slow down when we get close? After 2 miles that stretched forever, I looked back and he was gone. We get home, book it into the house and tell our parents. The next morning, I get up to head somewhere, and look at my brother's truck, thinking about the night before. I wondered what that loud bang was. Just before we started getting chased, I inspect the truck. I found a handprint smeared in the dust from about 2/3 away to the right, then smeared to the right taillight. I never went there again. Night's final encounter. My house backed up to a fairly dense woods. There was a steep decline with a relatively flat wooded area where the creek ran through. This creek wasn't that deep, waist deep in certain areas, but mostly knee or ankle deep. But it was wide. Growing up, I lived in those woods, hiking up and down the creek, mapping out the woods, exploring a few long abandoned and collapsed houses that nature had reclaimed. I lived and breathed nature, and those woods were my home away from home. My dad grew up in the area. My aunt, uncle, and cousins lived just next door, and it was a pretty close-knit community. Naturally, everyone has ghost stories about their hometown, a haunted house, a tragedy of some sort that remains a stain on its history. My village has no different. My father would always tell stories about ghosts or abnormal happenings he experienced in his youth. One thing he would always tell me when I told him I was going into the woods was, the trees may not walk about or talk, but they do see and remember. I always thought of that as him saying, don't be stupid out there. My first encounter with people in the woods, feral people in the woods, which is what I always called them, was when I was on one of my daily excursions in the wild green. It was mid-July, hot and humid. I stuck mostly to the creek as it was cool and didn't have to battle my way through the thick undergrowth. I hiked approximately 2 miles along the creek, hunting for crawdad and looking for signs of deer, rabbit, or the fabled albinoed squirrel. I kept traveling and eventually arrived at a relatively open field that had waist-deep grass. I frequently stopped here to gather wild berries, rest, and spook the few white-tailed deer bedded in the area. But this day was different. As I drew closer to the field, I noticed someone standing in the field. Instinctively, I slowed down, lowered my posture to try to minimize my noise. I wasn't used to seeing anyone this far into the woods. The nearest house to that location was about 1.5 miles through thick undergrowth and fairly steep ravines. As I hugged the bank of the creek, I moved to the edge of the open field, slowly peeking over the tall grass to see if they were still there. Nothing. I thought that perhaps they saw or heard me trudging through the creek and instinctively ducked as well. I was not about to find out, so I turned around and headed back home. All 2.5 miles back, I was more aware of my surroundings and far more cautious of the sound as I moved, avoiding walking in the creek to prevent the sloshing of water to give me away. As I crept through the branches jutting into the bank of the creek, I made my way to the other area I was familiar with. A small game trail ran through here, and it would cut my time and distance to get back home. The only downside was it was pretty overgrown to either side, and portions had thick thorn bushes. The entire time I trekked back, I felt as if I was being watched. I never felt like I was in danger or vulnerable to being attacked, but I could feel eyes on me. I was uneasy the entire time I followed that game trail, routinely stopping and listening to determine if I could hear footsteps or if I was being followed. Still nothing. I made it about halfway back home when I saw in the corner of my eye a figure standing a short distance away. But as I moved my eyes in the direction of the figure, they seemed to just meld into the foliage. I thought maybe my paranoia was making me see things, so I just continued on. A few 100 feet more, I again saw another figure, this time further away out of the peripheral vision, and again, as I looked in that distance, they melted back into the background. But this time, it happened twice. As I looked at that figure disappear, another appeared again in my peripheral, closer, but still a ways away. The entire time I never felt to be in danger. Creeped out, yeah, but I never felt like whatever was there was nefarious intent. This continued on for a remainder of the time, making my way back home, but the more it happened, the less I felt afraid of the figures, even going as far as saying out loud, "I know you're there. I don't know what you are or what you want, but I'm not here to cause trouble." Eventually, I made it to my backyard and turned around to face the woods to see if they were there. Nothing was there. My dad was next to his shed burning some cut grass in the backyard. I walked over to him to tell him what I experienced, and before I could say a word, he looked at me and, with a slight grin, said, "I see you saw them too." I guess I had a look of terror written all over my face. Without missing a beat, he put down the hoe he was using to stoke the fire, walked past me to the wood line, pulled out his can of dip he had in his pocket, opened it, took a pinch out, and placed it on a stone that was jutting out from the ground and walked back. I asked him what he did that for, and he said he gave them an offering. He began explaining what he meant by the trees see, and remember that it was important that we respect nature when we are in her domain, and give an offering in return when we take things from her. Otherwise, she just may not let us back out. He gave me the can of dip and said what I saw were what he believed spirits of Native Americans keeping watch over their former land. I didn't really know what they were at the time, but I followed suit with what my dad did whenever I made my way back into the woods. I always left an offering, and although I still do see them from time to time, I never felt like I was ever in danger, and always made sure to respect them. If they appeared in my peripheral, I would travel in the opposite direction, apologizing for any transgressions. My cousins and many people in my village are all aware of their existence, and just kind of give them a wide berth whenever they appear. It's obvious their existence is real, but what I learned from them and experienced from them, a whole lot of people will not. Wow, what a great second half. I hope you guys all enjoyed it. You know, Dogman and Bigfoot are very terrifying, but for some reason, feral humans just, I don't know, they really frighten me. Crawlers, Bigfoot, Dogman, but feral human beings, kind of like the Denisovians, I guess, will just terrify me. You know, they resemble us so much, but they really don't. So much so that they've made horror movies about these things. And I say things because it's kind of hard to call them people, even though we call them feral people, feral persons, feral humans. Monsters is what I call them. Anyway, guys, stay safe, happy, and healthy, and God bless you all.